The year is 1942. The city of Lyon, France, is a nest of shadows and fear. It is the dark heart of Vichy France, the Nazi puppet state, and it is crawling with agents of the Gestapo. On street corners, posters begin to appear. They show a crudely drawn sketch of a woman's face, sharp, intelligent, and unremarkable. But beneath it is a warning. The Gestapo are hunting a ghost. They know her only as La Dame qui boite, the limping lady. Their orders, issued from the ruthless Gestapo chief Klaus Barbie himself, are absolute. She is the most dangerous of all Allied spies. We must find and destroy her. They hunted a single woman with more desperation than an entire enemy division. Why? Because this one woman, an American civilian with a wooden leg, was the architect of their nightmare. She was building an invisible army to tear down the Third Reich from within. This isn't just a war story. This is the story of the greatest spy the Nazis could never catch. A woman who would plan an impossible prison break from inside a fortress. A woman who would cross frozen mountains on her prosthetic limb to escape. And a woman who would return to lead 1/500 guerrilla fighters in a wave of bloody vengeance. This is the story of Virginia Hall. To understand the spy, you must first understand the rebel Virginia Hall was born on April 6, 1906, in Baltimore, Maryland. She was born into privilege, the daughter of a successful banker and cinema owner, Edwin Hall. Her mother, Barbara, had a simple, clear plan for her daughter: marry rich, attend parties, and live a life of comfortable leisure. Virginia had other ideas. From her earliest days, she was known as Dindy. And Dindy was a force of nature. While other girls of her class practiced piano, Dindy was practicing her aim with a shotgun. She was a tomboy, an adventurer, who preferred the company of animals and the grit of the outdoors to the sterile drawing rooms of Baltimore society. In her 1924 yearbook, at just 18, she wrote a simple, defiant sentence that would define her entire life: "I must have my liberty." This was the age of the flapper, of jazz, of women's suffrage. And Virginia wanted it all. She refused to be a footnote in her own life. She broke off an engagement to a wealthy bachelor, horrifying her mother, to pursue a radical dream. She wanted to be an ambassador. In the 1920s, this was unthinkable. The State Department was a fortress of men. But Virginia didn't care. She had a brilliant mind and a flair for languages. She enrolled at Barnard College in Manhattan, but the real prize was across the ocean. In 1926, she moved to Paris. This was the Paris of Hemingway and Fitzgerald, the epicenter of art, literature, and intellectual fire. Virginia thrived. She studied French, German, and Italian, absorbing the continent, its culture, and its politics. She loved the French people, a love that would one day call her back to their darkest hour. In 1927, she moved to Vienna, and here the tone began to change. She wasn't just a student anymore. She was a witness. She watched with growing horror the birth of fascism in Italy under Benito Mussolini. She saw the poison of Hitler's Nazi party seeping out of Germany and into the streets of Austria. This was an offense to her deepest core. The strutting thugs, the blind obedience, the brutal suppression of liberty. It was everything she despised. This early disgust for totalitarianism planted a seed. It would later bloom into a righteous, cold fury. She returned home in 1929, just before the Wall Street crash wiped out fortunes, including a part of her family's. Then, in 1931, a personal tragedy struck. Her father, Ned, died of a sudden heart attack. He was the one who had understood her, who had encouraged her rebellious streak, who had even bought her the shotgun she treasured. His death was a devastating blow, but it did not deter her. It hardened her resolve. She would live the life of adventure he had always encouraged. She passed the Foreign Service exam and, in 1931, was appointed as a clerk at the American Embassy in Warsaw, Poland. It was a glorified secretary's job, but it was a foot in the door. She was efficient, diligent, and deeply, profoundly bored. This wasn't diplomacy. This was paperwork. She was already fighting a war on two fronts, one against the boredom of her desk and the other against the casual sexism of the State Department. She had already been rejected once for a diplomatic post simply for being a woman. She tried again in Warsaw, but was told she missed a deadline. The message was clear. You don't belong here. Frustrated, she sought a new post, one with adventure. In April 1933, she relocated to Izmir, Turkey. The city was exotic, a gateway to the outdoors. Here, she could bide her time, study, and plan her next attempt to shatter the glass ceiling. It was here, in the Turkish wetlands, that Virginia's life would change forever. It was here that a single, violent second would set in motion the tragedy and the legend of the Limping Lady. It was December 8, 1933. Virginia was 27 years old. She was doing what she loved most, hunting. She was out with friends, stalking snipe in the marshes. In her hands, she carried her prized 12-gauge shotgun, the one her father had given her. The hunting party came to a wire fence. Virginia, ever the independent spirit, moved to climb it. She was hasty. She forgot to engage the safety latch. As she clambered over, she tripped. The gun fell. In the split-second instinct to catch it, her hand hit the trigger. The 12-gauge shell fired directly into her left foot. The blast was catastrophic. She collapsed, unconscious, blood pouring into the marshland. Her friends, horrified, rushed to her. They tore strips of cloth to make a tourniquet, fighting to staunch the flow. They carried her, a dead weight, to the nearest hospital. For 3 weeks, she seemed to be recovering. The wound was grievous, but she was strong. Then the infection set in. In 1933, there were no miracle antibiotics. There was no penicillin. The infection was a ravenous, invisible enemy. It crept up her leg, turning flesh to gangrene. The doctors were helpless. The infection was poisoning her blood, and it was killing her. They were left with one brutal choice. On Christmas Day, 1933, surgeons amputated Virginia's left leg below the knee. When she woke up from the anesthetic, she fell into a despair deeper than any physical pain. It wasn't just the loss of her leg, it was the loss of her future. How could she be an adventurer? How could she ride horses, hunt, or climb? How could she ever be an ambassador now? The nightmare wasn't over. The infection hadn't been stopped. Sepsis took hold. Her body was shutting down. She grew delirious, her fever raging. Virginia Hall was dying. Years later, she would describe a vision she had in that fever dream. Her late father, Ned, standing by her bed, urging her to fight, to survive. And she did. Miraculously, the fever broke. After weeks on the brink of death, she was transferred to a hospital in Istanbul to convalesce. The immediate danger was past, but the new reality was just beginning. She was fitted with a prosthetic. In the 1930s, these were not the high-tech limbs of today. It was a cumbersome, heavy wooden leg. A dead weight. Virginia, in a moment of dark, defiant humor, named it Cuthbert. Cuthbert would be her constant companion and her constant tormentor. It was agonizing. The stump was perpetually raw, rubbing against the crude wooden socket. It caused her pain every single day for the rest of her life. Many people would have been broken by this. They would have retreated from the world, accepting a life of quiet pity. Virginia Hall got angry. Against her doctor's advice, she returned to work in May 1934. But the strain was too much. She returned to her family's farm in Maryland to truly heal. It was there she relearned everything: how to walk, how to climb stairs, how to live as an amputee. She forced her body to obey her will. She learned to walk with a steady, determined, limping gait. In November 1934, she was back. She secured a position at the American consulate in Venice, Italy, and from there she applied again to become a diplomat. She had the experience. She had the languages. She had the grit. The answer she received was a cold, bureaucratic stab in the back. The State Department officially rejected her. The reason? A 19th century rule that forbade the hiring of anyone with an amputated limb. It was the ultimate insult. It wasn't her gender this time. It wasn't her qualifications. It was Cuthbert. Her talent, her ambition, her years of service, all erased by a single archaic line in a rulebook. To add insult to injury, they transferred her to Tallinn, Estonia, a remote frozen outpost, a diplomatic dead end. Virginia was trapped. For 7 years, she had served the State Department faithfully, and for her trouble, she had been relegated to the sidelines, a cripple in their eyes, unfit for real work. The 1930s were drawing to a close. The murmurings of war she had heard in Vienna were now a deafening roar. On September 1st, 1939, Hitler's panzers smashed into Poland. The Second World War had begun. That was the breaking point. Virginia Hall chose to resign. If the American government wouldn't let her fight fascism from a desk, she would find another way. She left Estonia, catching one of the last ships to London. She was a civilian, a woman with one leg, from a neutral country. She tried to find any branch of the British military that would take her. She was rejected. Every single time. Exasperated, she traveled to Paris in February 1940. The phony war was still on, but France was mobilizing. Virginia, fluent in French, enrolled as an ambulance driver, not with a hospital, but with the French army. This was no desk job. This was the front line. She was assigned to Metz, in northeastern France. When the wounded came in, she bravely carted them from the front-line aid stations to a hospital 200 miles away in Paris. She drove her ambulance often under direct enemy bombardment, the sky screaming with artillery. She was finally in the war. Then, on May 10, 1940, the real war began. The German offensive, the Blitzkrieg, was launched. The Germans didn't attack where the French expected. They attacked through the impassable Ardennes forest. The French army, considered the best in the world, was routed. It didn't just bend, it shattered. Paris was abandoned a month later. France had fallen. Hitler marched into the city. He split the nation in two. The north and west became the occupied zone. The south became the free zone, a so-called independent state run by an aging French war hero, Marshal Philippe Pétain. It was called Vichy France, and it was a lie. It was a puppet state, its strings pulled directly by the Third Reich. The Vichy regime, eager to please its new masters, began a dark period of collaboration with the Nazis. For Virginia, the war was over before it began. Her ambulance unit was disbanded. She had no choice but to fall back with the retreating, broken French army. In August 1940, she crossed into the unoccupied zone. She was an American citizen in a country that now answered to Hitler. She had to get out. She made her way to England. But as she left, she made a promise. She did not know how. She did not know when. But she would one day return. She would return to help liberate the country she had grown to love. She didn't have to wait long. Her breakthrough came not in an office, but in a train station in a small Spanish town. It was a chance encounter with a man named George Bellows. Bellows posed as a salesman. He was, in truth, an undercover British agent. He was a recruiter. The two struck up a conversation. Virginia, passionate and angry, described the situation in France. She told him of her exploits as an ambulance driver, her fury at the Nazi occupation, her desperation to do something. Bellows was impressed, more than impressed. He saw what the State Department had missed. He saw the grit, the languages, the bravery under fire. The fact that she was an American woman from a neutral country was the perfect cover. he made a bold decision. He gave her a phone number in London for a friend of his. That friend was Nicholas Bottle, the newly appointed head of F Section for the Special Operations Executive. The SOE. The SOE was a new secret organization reporting directly to Winston Churchill. Its mission was simple: set Europe ablaze. This was not the gentlemanly spying of MI6. This was a secret war of sabotage, subversion, and guerrilla tactics. SOE agents were deployed deep behind enemy lines, under deep cover, with only their wits to rely on. Virginia made the call. She was invited to dinner with Bottle. He was as stunned by her as Bellows had been. The next day, he rushed to SOE headquarters at 64 Baker Street and dictated an urgent memo. He wanted her. Her American citizenship was the perfect cover. Her languages were essential. And her disability? The limp? The SOE saw it not as a weakness, but as the ultimate disguise. Who would ever suspect a woman with a wooden leg of being a deadly secret agent? In February 1941, at the age of 35, Virginia Hall traveled to a secret training facility in the New Forest. She was given an intensive crash course in the dark arts of espionage. How to kill a man silently. How to derail a train. How to handle explosives. How to pick a lock. How to resist interrogation. How to use a cyanide capsule. Her cover was prepared. She would be a foreign correspondent for the New York Post. Her code name, Geologist 5. Her primary purpose, go to Vichy, France. Not to fight, but to build. To coordinate and organize an underground resistance network, a secret army that would lie dormant, waiting to support the Allied invasion that was, at this point, years away. On August 23, 1941, armed with basic training, a few poison pills, and a burning hatred for the Nazis, Virginia Hall left for France. She arrived in the unoccupied zone on September 3rd. She was alone. She had no contacts. She had no radio. And she had Cuthbert. She was walking directly into the lion's den. When we left Virginia Hall, she had just stepped into the abyss. It was September 1941. She was alone in Vichy, France, a neutral American correspondent by day, a secret British agent by night. She had no contacts, no radio, and a 7-pound prosthetic leg she called Cuthbert. Her mission, to build a secret army under the very noses of the Gestapo. She was walking directly into the lion's den. But the lions had no idea who they were hunting. Virginia Hall, codenamed Geologist 5, announced her arrival in Vichy using her real name. It was a move of pure audacity. She was a correspondent for the New York Post. She immediately began writing articles, encoding vital intelligence about the political situation and German troop movements, and sending them back to London. Her cover was twofold. It gave her a reason to travel and ask questions, and it allowed her to feed information to the SOE. She made connections, including with the U.S. ambassador, Admiral William Leahy, but she quickly found that Vichy, the seat of the puppet government, was too small, too paranoid, too crawling with spies. The American ambassador had also strictly prohibited any clandestine activities through his office. America was not yet at war. Spying was not a good look for a neutral country. Frustrated and isolated, Virginia made a decision a month later. She would move to Lyon, France's third-largest city. Lyon was a sprawling industrial hub. It was the perfect place for a spy to disappear. But with increased opportunity came increased, terrifying danger. Lyon was also home to Klaus Barbie. The notorious SS operative, known as the Butcher of Lyon, was the head of the Gestapo in the region. He was a sadist, a master torturer, and he had an almost supernatural talent for sniffing out resistance. Virginia Hall was setting up her base of operations in the personal hunting ground of one of the Nazis' most ruthless killers. The city was teeming with refugees. Food was rationed. Finding a room was nearly impossible. Virginia's first safe house was a room in a nunnery. The convent's 6:30 p.m. curfew was not exactly ideal for running a secret network, but it became, for a time, the SOE's most reliable base. From this humble room, Virginia began to weave her web. She moved to a hotel in the center of town and began the patient, deadly work of recruitment. Every conversation was a risk. A single mistake, a single misplaced word to the wrong person, would mean a knock on the door at 4 a.m., a trip to Gestapo headquarters, and an agonizing death. Her first key recruit was an American. George Whittinghill, the U.S. vice consul, was sympathetic to her cause. He agreed to smuggle her messages in the diplomatic mailbag, which was protected from German searches. For months, this slow, cumbersome diplomatic bag was her only lifeline to London. With this link secured, her network exploded. She codenamed it Heckler. Virginia's genius was in finding the unlikely resistors. She recruited Dr. Jean Rousset, a respected local gynecologist. His clinic became a critical safe house for agents on the run and downed Allied pilots. She also recruited Joe Gerin, the owner of one of Lyon's most renowned brothels. Gerin's brothel became a listening post. Her prostitutes would entertain German officers, listening for loose talk and passing the secrets to Virginia. They also waged their own secret war. Gerin would provide Dr. Rousset with prostitutes suffering from venereal diseases, who would then be given a clean bill of health to intentionally infect the local German garrison. The Heckler network grew with terrifying speed. Virginia Hall, the limping lady, became the central hub for all resistance in southern France. She was a banker, funding cells, a quartermaster, organizing parachute drops of weapons and supplies, a travel agent, smuggling escaping airmen over the border, and a spy master, coordinating acts of sabotage that baffled the German high command. But she had a critical weakness: communication. The diplomatic bag was too slow. She needed wireless radio operators to send and receive urgent intelligence, and radios were a death sentence. The Vichy police and Gestapo had detection vans that roamed the cities. Transmitting for more than a few minutes meant they could triangulate the signal. The average life expectancy of a wireless operator was just 6 weeks. The SOE began parachuting operators in. But one, codenamed Christophe, was captured almost immediately. After his release, he set up in a safe house in Marseille, the Villa de Bois. Then, in a catastrophic breach of security, Christophe did the unthinkable. Towards the end of October 1941, feeling isolated, he invited all known SOE agents in southern France to meet him at the Villa de Bois. It was supposed to be a gathering, a way to build morale. It was, instead, a trap. Unbeknownst to Christophe, the Villa de Bois had been compromised. The Vichy police knew all about it, tipped off by a captured agent. They were watching, and they were waiting. Virginia Hall received the invitation. But something didn't feel right. She had spent 7 weeks alone, desperate for contact, yet this invitation felt wrong. It was too open, too reckless. She trusted her instincts. She wisely and fatefully decided not to go. The others were not so cautious. One by one, over a 2-week period, a dozen SOE operatives and wireless operators, the entire backbone of the British spy network, traveled to the villa. They walked right into the waiting arms of the French counterterrorism police. What became known as the Marseille mousetrap was a disaster. With one single stupid mistake, the entire SOE operation in southern France was obliterated. Every agent, every radio operator, arrested, gone. Virginia Hall was left as one of the few, perhaps the only agent still at large, and with the arrest of every wireless operator, her fast link to London was severed. She was deaf, dumb, and hunted. The months that followed were a new low. Her network was in ashes. Then, on December 7, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. America entered the war. Instantly, Virginia's cover as a neutral American journalist vanished. She was now an enemy alien, trapped in a country controlled by her enemies. The Gestapo and the Vichy police began to hear whispers of a mysterious female spy master who had, somehow, avoided the mousetrap. A woman. With a limp, her network was annihilated. Her cover was blown, and her fellow agents, the men who became known as the Clan Cameron, were now rotting in an impenetrable Vichy fortress at Mauthausen, awaiting torture and certain execution. Virginia Hall was alone. She was cornered, and now she wasn't just building a network, she was planning a prison break. When we left Virginia Hall, she was the last agent standing. Her entire SOE network had been obliterated in the Marseille mousetrap. Her fellow agents were in a Vichy fortress, awaiting execution, and the Gestapo, led by Klaus Barbie, was now hunting for her, the mysterious limping lady. She was cut off, alone, and her cover as a neutral American was gone. For any other agent, this was the end. For Virginia Hall, it was the beginning. She was no longer just building a network. She was planning a rescue. The 12 captured agents, the Clan Cameron, were being held at the Mauthausen internment camp. It was a brutal fortress. Escape was considered impossible. Virginia disagreed. She couldn't go near the camp herself. Her face and her limp were too well known. So, she activated her most valuable asset, Gabby Bloch, the wife of one of the captured agents. The plan was a masterpiece of audacity. How do you smuggle a workshop into a high-security prison? One piece at a time. Gabby visited her husband 3 times a week, and each time she brought gifts, all approved by the lazy camp guards. She brought jars of jam, with small metal files hidden beneath the fruit. She brought hollowed-out books, containing screwdrivers and hammers. She brought tins of sardines, the metal from which would be painstakingly repurposed into tools, blades, and, most incredibly, a key. While Gabby worked the outside, the prisoners worked the inside. Using metal from the sardine tins and a piece of bread to make a mold of the lock, George, an SOE agent, began to hammer and chisel a makeshift key to their barracks door. To mask the sound, the other inmates would burst into loud, boisterous choruses of song. Gabby, meanwhile, played her own part. She spent her evenings at the local hotel bar, where the camp guards drank. She dropped loud, confident hints about an Allied victory, and the rewards that would come to any Frenchman who chose the winning side. She successfully befriended a guard named José Sevilla, who became their man on the inside, but the plan was far from perfect. Disaster struck. The first key, so painstakingly crafted, did not work. It wouldn't turn the lock. The men were despondent. They had to start all over, frantically engineering a new key before the new moon period ended, and the nights were no longer dark enough. Virginia, on the outside, was running out of time. The Gestapo was closing in. The SOE, fearing her capture, officially recalled her to London. She ignored the order. She wasn't leaving her men behind. She needed to speed things up, and for that, she devised her most cunning plan. She enlisted a 70-year-old French priest. This priest was a veteran of the Great War, where he had lost both of his legs. His station and his disability made him above suspicion. He began making pastoral visits to the camp, rolling in on his wheelchair, his cassock hiding his disability. The guards let him in, allowing him time alone with the prisoners to hear their confessions. On one of these visits, he produced, from under his cassock, a wireless radio. The prisoners were stunned. George wasted no time, running an antenna to the camp's perimeter fence. He began transmitting. From inside the prison camp, the SOE in London was speechless. A voice from the dead, transmitting from inside Mauthausen. George told them the escape was imminent. This bought Virginia the time she needed. On the night of July 15, 1942, the new key worked. Virginia gave the signal. Inside the camp, Sevilla, their guard, plied the camp chief with wine. He had also arranged for the guard in Watchtower 7, the one closest to the barracks, to light a cigarette at the precise moment the coast was clear. The men waited. Agonizing hours passed. The signal never came. The guard had failed them. Sevilla, realizing what had happened, took matters into his own hands. At 3 a.m., he climbed the watchtower himself and lit his pipe. It was the signal. The men unlocked the barracks door. They had run a simple string as a guide from their barracks to the fence. One by one, they slipped into the darkness. In just 12 minutes, all 12 men slipped under the fences and barbed wire, escaping into the night. The manhunt was immediate and brutal. The Gestapo was furious, but Virginia was one step ahead. She had her network spread a rumor. The escapees had been picked up by Royal Air Force bombers. They were no longer in France. The Gestapo, believing the rumor, scaled back the search. The Mauthausen prison break, masterminded by the limping lady, became the stuff of legends. Virginia and her network were on a high, but the higher you fly, the harder you fall. The Gestapo, though fooled, knew the rumors of the limping lady were true. They became obsessed. They sent in their own agent, a young, charismatic priest with piercing blue eyes named Robert Ailish. His code name was Agent Axel. He infiltrated Virginia's network through one of her most trusted confidants, Dr. Rousset. Virginia was skeptical of him from the start, but she allowed him access. It was a fatal mistake. Agent Axel began feeding her entire network piece by piece to the Gestapo. But before he could get to her, the war changed. In November 1942, the Allies launched Operation Torch, landing in North Africa. In direct response, a furious Hitler ordered the immediate and total occupation of the Free Zone. Vichy France was over. The Wehrmacht marched south. The Gestapo took direct control of Lyon. Klaus Barbie was now the undisputed king. Virginia's vast network of informers gave her one last gift: a warning. The Nazis were invading. She had hours. She gathered her documents and money and caught the last train out of Lyon, just 3 days before the Wehrmacht marched in. The train took her to the edge of the Pyrenees Mountains. This was her only escape route, 50 miles of frozen, snow-covered peaks, separating France from the safety of Spain. She would have to cross them on foot. This was the journey that made her rue the day she ever touched that shotgun. Her prosthetic, Cuthbert, became her personal hell. The cold was unbearable. The cumbersome wooden leg rubbed her stump until it was a raw, bloody mess. The journey was agonizing, a slow-motion torture. During the crossing, she maintained radio contact with her SOE handlers in London. She sent them a simple, coded message. Cuthbert is being tiresome. The radio operator in London, not realizing Cuthbert was her leg, sent back a chillingly practical reply. If Cuthbert is being tiresome, have him eliminated. She didn't. After 3 days of blinding pain and relentless struggle, she and her guide descended into Spain. She was immediately arrested by the Spanish authorities for crossing the border illegally. The American embassy secured her release. She was finally safe. She returned to England, a hero. The SOE, however, had other ideas. They refused to send her back. She was, they argued, too notorious. The Gestapo had her description. Her limp was a liability. She was given a desk job. For Virginia Hall, this was a fate worse than death. But the British SOE was no longer the only game in town. The Americans had created their own version, the Office of Strategic Services, OSS. Its head, General Wild Bill Donovan, knew exactly who Virginia Hall was, and he did not see a liability. He saw a weapon. In 1944, Virginia Hall, now working for the Americans, demanded to go back. She returned to France on March 24th. Oi born fiu broi dis, Saint Antoine fiu, Kendri dan 24th wafer. Not by parachute. Cuthbert made that impossible, but by gunboat. She was unrecognizable. Her hair was dyed gray. Her teeth were ground down. She was disguised as an elderly peasant woman, her limp now perfectly matching her cover. And this time, her mission was not espionage. It was war. She linked up with the rural guerrilla bands of French resistance fighters known as the Maquis. At first, these rough, hardened fighters were reluctant to take orders from a woman. They learned quickly. Virginia, now 38 years old, became a guerrilla commander. She was a natural. She trained 3 battalions of fighters, teaching them sabotage and close-quarters combat. As the Allies prepared for D-Day, Virginia's army unleashed hell on the Germans. She organized and directed the activities of 1,500 resistance fighters. In just 8 weeks, she transmitted 37 intelligence reports on German defenses. She supervised 27 parachute drops of supplies. Her forces executed attacks that led to the deaths of over 170 German soldiers and the capture of 800 more. They blew up 4 bridges, derailed freight trains, and severed key rail lines, crippling the German response to the Allied invasion. Virginia Hall's mission was an overwhelming, brutal, and unqualified success. When the war ended, her contribution was undeniable. General Donovan personally awarded her the Distinguished Service Cross, the only one given to a civilian woman in all of World War II. 2. True to form. When President Truman wanted to give her the award in a public ceremony, Virginia declined. She was still in active service, she said. The publicity might compromise her agents. She was also made an honorary member of the Order of the British Empire and was awarded the Croix de Guerre by France. After the war, she joined the newly formed CIA. In a final, bitter irony, she once again faced the same discrimination that had haunted her youth. She was a woman. She had a disability. She was assigned a desk job, persistently passed over for promotion by the men who had never faced a fraction of the dangers she had. She eventually married a fellow OSS agent, Paul Guillot, and retired to a quiet farm in Maryland. She never spoke of her career. For decades, her story, the story of the Gestapo's most wanted, simply slipped into obscurity. Virginia Hall died on July 8, 1982. She was the woman the State Department had rejected, the woman the SOE had benched, and the woman the Gestapo could never catch. She had written in her high school yearbook that she must have her liberty. In the end, she didn't just secure her own freedom, she secured the freedom of millions. May 12, 1945. The darkness is absolute. Not just dark, a suffocating, black, Burmese jungle darkness. It's a heat that sticks to the skin, a mud that pulls at the boots. In a hastily dug trench, 3 men wait. 3 Gurkha riflemen. They are listening. Through the oppressive humidity, a sound begins to cut through the insects. A slithering, a clicking of metal on stone, a whisper. It is the sound of at least 200 Imperial Japanese soldiers, creeping through the undergrowth, moving toward their position. Rifleman Lakiman Gurung grips his Lee Enfield rifle. He is 27 years old. He is 4 feet, 11 inches tall. A boy's height, holding the fate of an army. His post is the most forward position, the linchpin, the single exposed trench 100 yards ahead of the entire British defensive line. It is the key to the whole perimeter. If this one trench falls, the Japanese will roll up the flank and slaughter them. 2 full companies of surrounded Gurkhas will be annihilated in the dark. At 1:20 in the morning, the grenades begin to fall. Gurung watches the first one arc through the blackness. It lands just outside his trench. He scoops it up. He hurls it back. The explosion is a flash of white-hot light, and in that split second, he sees them. Dozens of Japanese soldiers, faces contorted, rushing his position. Another grenade falls. This one lands inside the trench. Gurung grabs it. He hurls it at the attackers. It detonates in midair. A third grenade. It arcs through the smoke. It lands right at his feet. A dark, metal pineapple of death. He reaches down. He picks it up, and this one explodes in his hand. The blast is catastrophic. It does not just wound him. It vaporizes the fingers of his right hand. Shrapnel, white-hot, rips into his face, destroying his right eye. Burns cover his arm, his chest, his legs. The other two Gurkhas in the trench are wounded by the same explosion, screaming in the mud. And 200 Japanese soldiers are charging straight at them, screaming, "Banzai!" firing as they come. Lakhiman Gurung is bleeding, half-blind, his right hand a mangled ruin of blood and bone. Any sane man would die. Any rational soldier would surrender or scream for a medic. Gurung was neither. He grabs his rifle with his left hand and begins to kill. For the next 4 hours, this single broken man will hold that trench alone. This is not just a war story. This is the untold, minute-by-minute account of the single most incredible one-man stand in modern history. This is the story of how one man, 4'11" tall, proved that courage is not measured in height or in having two hands to fight. It is measured in the refusal to die. From a life of grinding poverty in the mountains of Nepal to the brutal, diseased killing fields of the Burma campaign, from the moment a grenade destroyed his body to the 4 hours of hell that earned him the Victoria Cross. This is the story of Lakhiman Gurung, and this is how he became a legend. To understand the man who fought in that trench, you must first understand the mountains that forged him. Nepal, December 1917. Lakhiman Gurung was born in Dakhani, a tiny village in the hills west of Kathmandu. Life here was not just hard, it was vertical. His father farmed a small plot of land, barely enough to feed the family. It was a life of subsistence, of back-breaking work under a relentless sun, a prison of poverty framed by the most beautiful mountains on earth. For young men in these hills, there were only two choices: farm like their fathers, or fight. They could join the British Indian Army as Gurkhas. This was not just a job. It was an escape. It was an honor. It was a chance to prove something. The CT Gurkhas were already a global legend, the soldiers from Nepal who had served Britain since 1815. Their reputation terrified enemies across the British Empire. Fearless, disciplined, armed with the curved kukri knife, a weapon that every Gurkha carried, and knew how to use with devastating effect. British commanders valued them above almost any other infantry. German soldiers in both world wars learned to dread the sound of a Gurkha charge. So did the Japanese troops in Burma. The Gurkha motto was simple: Kayar Hunu Banda Marnu Ramro. Better to die than be a coward. This was not a slogan. It was a blood oath. It was a simple statement of fact. When you face a Gurkha, you face a man who has already accepted death. Gurung grew up hearing these stories. Men from villages just like his, who had earned medals fighting for Britain in India, in Afghanistan, in France. The army offered steady pay, respect, and a way out. But joining required passing a brutal selection process and meeting the minimum height requirement, 5 feet tall. Lakhiman Gurung stood 4 feet, 11 inches. He was, by every metric, too short. Under normal circumstances, he would have been rejected, sent back to the farm. But the circumstances in 1940 were not normal. In December of that year, Gurung walked to the British recruitment station. World War II was exploding. Germany controlled Europe. Japan was preparing to sweep through Asia. Britain was desperate for soldiers. The height requirements were quietly ignored. Gurung was accepted. He was 23 years old. One version of the story, perhaps embellished by time, says his father sent him to the village store to buy cigarettes. He met a friend who was enlisting. They went to the recruitment station together. Lakhiman Gurung never came home with the cigarettes. He disappeared into the army. 5 years later, he returned, missing an eye, missing a hand, and carrying the Victoria Cross. He joined the 4th Battalion, 8th Gurkha Rifles, one of the most storied regiments in the British Indian Army. He completed training. He learned to handle the .303 caliber Lee Enfield rifle. He mastered the tactics of jungle warfare, but more importantly, he absorbed the Gurkha code: aggression in attack, stubbornness in defense, never surrender, never retreat unless ordered, fight to the last man and the last round. These were not just words. They were the core of his identity. By 1944, Gurung's battalion was deployed to Hell on Earth, the Burma Campaign. This was not the war seen in Europe, with tanks battling on open fields or cities liberated by cheering crowds. This was a different kind of war, a forgotten war. It was a war fought against 3 distinct enemies. The first enemy was the jungle itself, a dense triple canopy hell that blocked out the sun. Monsoon rains that turned everything into a churning river of mud. And disease, malaria, dysentery, typhus, scrub typhus. Soldiers called it green hell. The jungle itself killed as many soldiers as combat, leaving men weak, feverish, and rotting from the inside out. The second enemy was the Imperial Japanese Army. By May 1945, the Japanese were cornered. They were beaten, but they were not broken. This was the army that had conquered most of Southeast Asia in 1942, an army that fought by the code of Bushido. Surrender was the ultimate disgrace. Capture meant torture. Japanese soldiers were taught to fight to the death, to take as many of the enemy with them as possible. They expected their opponents to do the same. They showed no mercy. They expected none. They were masters of infiltration, moving like ghosts through the jungle, attacking at night. They were experts in fanatical banzai charges, screaming waves of men designed to panic defenders and overrun positions before anyone could react. The Gurkhas had fought them before. They knew what to expect: violence, speed, grenades, and close-quarters combat with bayonets and knives. The third enemy was desperation. The British 14th Army, the Forgotten Army, had been slowly, agonizingly, pushing the Japanese back through Burma since 1944. Operation Extended Capital was in full swing, aiming to recapture central Burma and cut off Japanese supply lines. The Japanese position was collapsing. Allied forces had crossed the Irrawaddy River, but the Japanese weren't beaten yet. Scattered units, thousands of men, were now trying to break out of the encirclement, retreating south. A cornered animal is the most dangerous, and these were 200 cornered, fanatical animals, willing to attack anything in their path to escape the closing trap. On May 9, 1945, the 4th Battalion of the 8th Gurkha Rifles was ordered to block one of these Japanese withdrawal routes. They were moved near the village of Tongda. The terrain was a nightmare. Dense jungle, a few muddy trails. The monsoon rains had already started. Everything was wet, slippery, miserable. The Gurkhas dug defensive positions and waited. Intelligence reported Japanese forces were moving through the area. No one knew how many. No one knew when they would attack. Just that they were coming. Lakhiman Gurung's C Company was positioned on a reverse slope. Trenches dug into the hillside, overlapping fields of fire. But the jungle limited visibility to just a few dozen yards. The Japanese could get close, dangerously close, before being spotted. Gurung's section was assigned the most forward post. 3 men, in a single trench, about 100 yards ahead of the main British line. Their job was simple, and it was suicidal. They were the early warning system, the tripwire. Their job was to slow down any Japanese attack, to absorb the first wave, to give the rest of the company precious seconds to respond. It was the most dangerous position in the entire defensive perimeter, the first to be hit, the hardest to reinforce, the most likely to be overrun. Gurung and 2 other Gurkhas occupied that forward trench. They improved it as much as they could. They deepened the trench, piled sandbags, cleared fields of fire, placed ammunition within easy reach, and Lakhiman Gurung placed his kukri knife on the parapet of the trench within arm's reach. If the Japanese got that close, he would need it. That curved blade had killed enemies for generations of Gurkhas. He was not going to be different. On the night of May 12th, the jungle went silent. The insects stopped. And then it exploded. The Japanese came. This was not a probe. This was not a patrol. This was a full-scale assault. At least 200 soldiers hitting C Company's position with everything they had. Grenades, machine guns, rifles, screaming charges designed to panic the defenders and break the perimeter, and the entire massive weight of that attack was aimed at one single section of the line. Gurung's section, his trench, the key to the whole position. At 1:20 in the morning, Naik Debasing Buddha, Gurung's section commander, had just gotten all his men to stand to in their trenches when the grenades started falling. Japanese soldiers were creeping close, using the darkness, throwing grenades to soften up the defenses before the main assault. Buddha watched from his trench, just yards behind Gurung. He saw a grenade land near Gurung's trench. He saw Gurung scoop it up and hurl it back. The explosion lit the jungle, revealed dozens of Japanese soldiers rushing forward. Seconds later, another grenade fell inside Gurung's trench. He grabbed it, threw it out. It exploded in the air. Japanese soldiers were screaming, firing, getting closer. A third grenade arced through the darkness and landed right at Gurung's feet. He bent down, he picked it up, and it detonated before he could throw it. The blast was catastrophic. His right hand, gone. His right eye, destroyed. His 2 comrades, badly wounded, screaming in the bottom of the trench, and 200 Japanese soldiers were seconds away from overrunning them. The battle for the perimeter, the battle for survival, the battle of Lakhiman Gurung had just begun. The world vanished in a roar of white fire and deafening thunder. Lakhiman Gurung was thrown backward against the trench wall. The pain was instant, absolute, an excruciating, blinding agony that should have shut his body down. His 2 comrades were screaming. The air was thick with cordite and the smell of his own burned flesh. Through the ringing in his ears, he could hear another sound. The sound of the Japanese, charging, firing, seconds away. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He didn't check his wounds. Survival instinct, the instinct to flee, was overridden by something else. Something forged in the mountains of Nepal, The Gurkha Code. Better to die than be a coward. His two comrades were badly wounded, disoriented, unable to fight. The Japanese assault was seconds from overwhelming the position. Lakhiman Gurung grabbed his rifle with his left hand. His right hand was a mangled mess of blood and bone. It no longer worked. It was gone. He improvised. He braced the rifle against his left hip, aimed with his one remaining eye into the darkness, and started firing at the shadows rushing toward him. The Japanese soldiers expected to find dead or dying defenders. They expected to overrun the trench in seconds, a bloody footnote in their retreat. What they found was a single rifleman shooting back. Accurately. Rapidly. They found a Gurkha who was screaming at them in Nepali, shouting challenges, telling them to come and fight, refusing to die. The shock of it stopped the Japanese advance cold. For just a few precious seconds, the lead attackers faltered. It was long enough for Gurung to kill several more soldiers, long enough for confusion to ripple through the Japanese ranks. Who was shooting? How many were there? The attackers adjusted. More grenades fell into and around Gurung's trench. He couldn't throw them back anymore. His right hand was useless. He pressed himself against the trench wall. He let the explosions wash over him. He took more shrapnel wounds, more burns, and he kept firing. The Japanese tried rushing the position again. Gurung shot them down, one after another. The bodies began to pile up in front of his trench. The dead became obstacles that slowed the living. From his position just yards behind, Gurung's commander, Nayak Debasingh Buddha, watched in disbelief. He had seen combat before. He had seen Gurkhas fight with incredible courage. But this was something else. This was a man who should have been incapacitated. A man who should have bled out in minutes, fighting with the effectiveness of a full-strength squad. Buddha tried to send men forward to reinforce Gurung's position. But the Japanese fire was too intense. It was a storm of bullets. Anyone who tried to reach that forward trench would be cut down before covering half the distance. So Lakhiman Gurung fought alone. One man, one eye, one hand, against 200 Japanese soldiers who were determined to break through his position. The physical challenge of what he was doing is almost incomprehensible. The Lee Enfield rifle was not a light weapon. It weighed over 9 pounds. It was a bolt-action rifle, a design that required the right hand to cycle rounds. You fire, you reach. Over with your right hand, you lift the bolt, pull it back, push it forward, lock it down. Gurung's right hand was destroyed. He had to learn, in real time, under fire, while bleeding from dozens of wounds, how to operate it with his left hand. Brace the rifle. Fire. Reach over with his left hand. Work the bolt. A clumsy, agonizingly slow process. Aim with his one remaining eye. Fire again. The pain must have been excruciating. The destroyed hand, the ruined eye, the shrapnel embedded in his body, the burns. Combat injuries produce shock. Massive blood loss causes weakness, dizziness, and unconsciousness. Gurung stayed conscious through sheer willpower. He had a job: hold the trench, stop the Japanese, protect his brothers in arms, the men in the trenches behind him. Everything else was secondary, including his own survival. The Japanese in the darkness couldn't understand what was happening. They outnumbered the defenders at this point at least 50-1. They were attacking the weakest point in the British line. They had surprise. They had momentum. And one, single, wounded Gurkha was stopping their entire assault. Japanese officers tried to rally their men. Push forward. Overrun that cursed trench. Every attempt met the same result. The single, steady crack of a Lee Enfield rifle. More dead soldiers. And a voice screaming defiance from that forward position. Ayo Gorkhali! The Gurkhas are upon you! The attackers changed tactics. They tried flanking the trench. Gurung shifted his fire, covering the approaches. The narrow front meant the Japanese couldn't bring their overwhelming numbers to bear all at once. They had to approach through his killing zone, and Gurung covered every inch of it. The battlefield was pitch black, lit only by the momentary hellish flashes of explosions and muzzle fire. Gurung was firing at those flashes. He was firing at sounds. He was firing at shadows. And he was hitting targets he could barely see, with a rifle he could barely operate. His section commander later tried to describe what he witnessed. He said Gurung fought like a demon, like something beyond human. Every few seconds, another Japanese soldier would fall. The enemy couldn't pinpoint where the fire was coming from. The muzzle flash of his rifle moved as he shifted position within his small trench. The Japanese fired wildly at where they thought he was. Most of their rounds missed. Gurung's rounds did not miss. He was a trained rifleman, even one-handed, and, half-blind, he was a better shot than soldiers who could see and had both hands. Time became meaningless. The night was a continuous roar of gunfire, explosions, and screaming. Gurung fired until his rifle was empty. He had to reload. This process normally required 2 hands to feed a 5-round charger clip into the magazine. He couldn't do that. He had to fumble for individual cartridges in his pouches with his one good hand. In the dark. While bleeding. While being shot at. He had to load them one. By feel. Every second of reloading was a second the Japanese could advance. He learned to reload faster. He got the rifle back into action. He started firing again. The process repeated, hundreds of times. Through the night, the Japanese threw more grenades. Gurung couldn't avoid them all. More shrapnel wounds, more pain. He kept fighting. Blood loss was weakening him. His vision was failing from the shock and the injury. He could feel himself fading. But the Japanese were still attacking. If he stopped fighting, they would break through. His brothers would die. The thought was unacceptable. He fired another round. And another. And another. Ammunition became critical. He had started the battle with a basic load of rifle rounds. He was firing steadily. Each shot had to count. He couldn't waste rounds. But he also couldn't let the Japanese close the distance. It was a razor's edge calculation. Shoot enough to keep them at bay. Conserve enough to keep fighting. He had no idea how much ammunition he had left. He just kept firing until the rifle was empty, then reloaded, then fired again. Around 3:15 in the morning, the intensity of the Japanese attack increased. This was not a random charge. This was a coordinated push. Officers had rallied their men for one more, massive attempt to break through. They came at Gurung's position, from multiple angles, throwing grenades, firing machine guns, rushing forward, accepting casualties, determined to overrun that single defended position that had stopped them for over an hour. Gurung met them with the same response. Rifle fire. Controlled. Accurate. Relentless. He was operating on pure instinct now, training so deeply ingrained that his body executed the motions without conscious thought. Aim. Fire. Cycle bolt. Aim. Fire. His left hand moved automatically. His one good eye tracked targets. His rifle spoke again, and again, and again. Japanese soldiers fell. The assault broke against his trench like a wave against a stone cliff. By 4 in the morning, the Japanese attacks were losing momentum. The officers couldn't rally their men for another push. There were too many casualties. Too many bodies piled up in front of that cursed trench. Too much fear of the unseen demon who wouldn't die and wouldn't stop killing. The attackers pulled back. They regrouped, tried to figure out what to do. They still outnumbered the defenders massively, but mass didn't matter if they couldn't bring it to bear. And bringing it to bear meant advancing through Gurung's killing zone. No one wanted to be the next soldier to die in front of that trench. Gurung used the lull to take stock. He was barely conscious. Blood loss and shock were taking their toll. His right hand hung useless, a dead weight. His right eye was a ruined socket. Shrapnel wounds covered his body. Every movement brought fresh, searing agony. He had no idea how many rounds he had left. He felt for cartridges in his pouches with his left hand. Not many, maybe enough for one more attack. Maybe not. He didn't think about medical attention. He didn't think about evacuation. He just watched the darkness. He waited for the next assault. He kept his rifle ready. Behind him, the rest of C Company was holding. They could hear the battle at Gurung's trench. They tried to provide supporting fire, but the darkness and jungle limited what they could do. Naik Buddha reported the situation to his company commander, one rifleman, holding the forward post alone, heavily wounded, still fighting, stopping an entire Japanese assault. The commander didn't believe it at first. Then he listened to the pattern of fire. Single rifle shots, controlled, precise, coming from that forward position. Still holding, still fighting, reinforcements could not reach Gurung. The Japanese controlled the ground between his trench and the main line. Any relief attempt would be wiped out, so Gurung stayed alone, outnumbered, wounded, running out of ammunition, but still holding. The Japanese had committed their entire force to breaking through this one point, and they had failed. One man had stopped them. As the first faint hint of gray light began to touch the eastern sky, the Japanese knew their time was up. Daylight meant Allied aircraft. It meant artillery. It meant death from above. They had one last chance. This was desperation. They gathered their remaining strength. They charged Gurung's position one last time, screaming, firing everything they had, believing that sheer fanatical numbers would finally overwhelm that single, stubborn defender. Lakiman Gurung met them with his last rounds of ammunition. He fired until the rifle was empty. The click of the bolt on an empty chamber. He threw the rifle down. Then he grabbed his kukri knife. If the Japanese reached his trench, he would kill them with steel. One-handed, half-blind, bleeding out. He would fight with the knife until they killed him, or he killed them all. Better to die than be a coward. But the Japanese assault broke before it even reached his trench. The final charge faltered. The attackers who weren't cut down by his last few rounds saw the sky lightening. They saw the piles of their own dead in front of that one position. They had no more will to fight. The survivors pulled back. They melted into the jungle, dragging their wounded, leaving their dead behind. They retreated from a position they should have overrun in minutes. Dawn broke. The battle was over. The jungle, which had roared with gunfire, was now filled with the cries of the wounded and a stunned silence. As the sun rose on May 13th, Naik Deba Singh Buddha and other Gurkhas rushed forward to Gurung's trench. They expected to find him dead. No one could survive that. No one could endure such intense, concentrated violence while so badly wounded. But Lakiman Gurung was alive. Barely. They found him sitting in his trench, surrounded by empty shell casings. His rifle was empty. His kukri knife was on the parapet, still within reach of his one good hand. His right hand was destroyed. His right eye was gone. Blood covered everything. He was still conscious, still watching the jungle, still ready to fight if the Japanese came back. Buddha and the others pulled him from the trench. They gave him water. They applied field dressings to his catastrophic wounds. The damage was permanent. His right hand would never function again. His right eye was gone forever. Shrapnel wounds covered his body. Burns needed treatment. He had lost a massive, almost fatal amount of blood. But he was alive, and his trench had held. The Japanese had failed to break through. The entire C Company perimeter was intact. Because one rifleman had refused to let them pass, medical evacuation came quickly. Gurung was carried to the rear. Field surgeons worked on him for hours. They saved his life, but they could not save his hand or his eye. The hand was amputated. Just a stump remained. The right eye was permanently blind. While Gurung was being evacuated, other Gurkhas examined the battlefield around his trench. What they found astonished them. 31 dead Japanese soldiers lay within a few yards of his position. 31 confirmed kills, all shot by one man, with one hand, in 4 hours of continuous combat. The physical evidence told the story better than words. Blood trails showed where many more wounded Japanese had been. Dragged away, Lakhiman Gurung had single-handedly stopped an assault by at least 200 soldiers. The recommendation for the Victoria Cross was immediate. Naik Debasing Buddha wrote a detailed report of what he had witnessed. The company commander endorsed it. Battalion command forwarded it up the chain. This was the kind of action that defined heroism. One man holding an impossible position against overwhelming odds, fighting despite catastrophic wounds, never retreating, never surrendering, saving his entire company through sheer willpower and skill. If any action deserved the highest decoration for valor, this was it. The Victoria Cross citation was approved and published in the London Gazette on August 9, 1945, just days before the war ended. The citation read, in part, Rifleman Lakhiman Gurung was manning the most forward post of his platoon, which bore the brunt of an attack by at least 200 of the Japanese enemy. Twice he hurled back grenades which had fallen on his trench, but the third exploded in his right hand, blowing off his fingers, shattering his arm, and severely wounding him in the face, body, and right leg. His two comrades were also badly wounded. But the rifleman, now alone and disregarding his wounds, loaded and fired his rifle with his left hand for 4 hours, calmly waiting for each attack, which he met with fire at point-blank range. Afterwards, there were 31 dead Japanese around his position. The citation, stark and official, still couldn't capture the full horror of what Gurung endured. 4 hours of continuous combat, bleeding, half-blind, in agony, operating a rifle one-handed in complete darkness, fighting an enemy that outnumbered him 50-1. No support, no reinforcement, no retreat, just duty and courage, and the Gurkha Code. Gurung recovered in military hospitals. The war ended while he was still being treated. Japan surrendered. The Burma campaign was over. Gurung's fighting days were finished. He returned to Nepal, to his village, to his family, missing an eye, missing a hand, and carrying the Victoria Cross. Only 13 Gurkhas have ever received it. Gurung was one of them. Life after the war was difficult. He couldn't farm effectively with one hand. The British government provided a small pension for Victoria Cross recipients, but it wasn't much. Gurung struggled financially for years. He married, had children, tried to build a normal life. But he was famous in Nepal, the one-handed Gurkha who had killed 31 Japanese soldiers. He became a living symbol of Gurkha courage. In 1995, 50 years after his action at Tongda, Gurung was invited to London for Victoria Cross commemorations. He was honored by Queen Elizabeth II. People wanted to hear his story, to understand how he had done what he did. Gurung's answers were always simple, humble. I was a Gurkha. I had my duty. I did what needed doing. He lived in Nepal for the rest of his life, becoming an advocate for Gurkha welfare, reminding people that soldiers from Nepal had served Britain faithfully for generations and deserved respect and support. Lakhiman Gurung died on December 12, 2010. He was 92 years old. His legacy endures. The 8th Gurkha Rifles, now part of the Indian Army, teach his story to every new recruit. Young Gurkhas learn about Lakhiman Gurung the same way he learned about heroes from earlier generations. The cycle continues. The Gurkha Museum in Winchester, England, displays his Victoria Cross citation. Visitors can read what he accomplished on that night in May 1945, but his most important legacy is what his story represents. Lakhiman Gurung was not superhuman. He was 4 feet, 11 inches tall, from a poor farming family. He had no special advantages, no elite training, no advanced weapons. What he had was duty, courage, the willingness to stand his ground when every instinct screamed at him to run. The refusal to quit when quitting would have been entirely justified. The Japanese soldiers who attacked his position that night were not cowards. They were experienced fighters who fought with fanatical determination. They outnumbered Gurung massively. They had every tactical advantage, except one. They didn't have a Gurkha in their way, and that one Gurkha refused to let them pass, refused to die, refused to fail his duty. Modern soldiers study Gurung's action, trying to understand the psychology of it. But the truth is simpler than the analysis. Gurung was trained. He was brave. He was committed to his brothers in arms. When the moment came, he did what Gurkhas have always done. He fought. The trench where Lakhiman Gurung made his stand no longer exists. The Burmese jungle has reclaimed that hillside. But the story remains. Passed down, taught to new soldiers. Remembered. 31 dead. 4 hours of hell. 1 hand, 1 eye. 1 Gurkha who simply would not die. When people ask how he did it, the answer is both simple and profound. He was a Gurkha. Khair Hunu Banda Marnu Ramro. Better to die than be a coward. On May 13, 1945, Lakhiman Gurung proved that Maxim wasn't just words. It was reality. It was duty. It was who he was. The Japanese learned that lesson the hardest way possible, and the world learned what one man, with 1 hand, could accomplish, when he simply refused to quit. If this story moved you, we would be honored if you'd like this video. Stories like these take days of research to bring to light, and your support helps us uncover more. Forgotten heroes from World War II. Operatives, conspicuous. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another incredible story from the greatest generation. We want to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from. Many of you served in the military or had family who fought in this war. Did you know someone who served with the Gurkha regiments? Have you heard similar stories of soldiers who fought against impossible odds? Share your memories and thoughts below. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering.